I don't know, when you do like a video like this or a conversation like this, I don't ever know where it's really going to go. A lot of times I have lots of notes and I have things formatted and how I'm going to talk about them. But when we get in this Neil Gaiman stuff, it's a lot more difficult. I don't even really know how I'm feeling or thinking about it. I've read this article from Vulture called "There Is No Safe Word: How the Best-Selling Fantasy Author Neil Gaiman Hid the Darkest Parts of Himself for Decades," and it paints a very disturbing picture of Neil Gaiman, who clearly is, a legendary comic book writer. Let's not take away some of his accolades and what he's been able to accomplish. Obviously, in just all fiction, but specifically comic books. We are a comic book channel here. A lot of Neil Gaiman fans out there. A lot of people really enjoy his Sandman Universe stuff and the things that he's created. But it's a really tough read. I don't know that this is something that everyone should read. It's very, very disgusting. It's heinous when you see some of these allegations out there, and I'm not going to be able to get into too many details because they are very, very explicit and certainly not appropriate for public consumption. I would have to do all kinds of disclaimers and stuff on this video if I wanted to really start reading into the specifics of what happened. They're that disturbing, really, and that kind of disgusting. A lot of things about like BDSM, and it sounds like while consent is a major point in BDSM, you have to have consent on both parties beforehand. Maybe that wasn't attained a vast majority of the time. Neil Gaiman has rebutted this, and I do want to put that out there, that he's put a disclaimer out providing somewhat his side of the story. I'll read that first just so you know what's going on. Gaiman took to his blog on Tuesday. He addressed the various reports about him, noting that he had chosen to stay quiet out of respect for the people who were sharing their stories, as well as a desire not to draw even more attention to what he claims is misinformation. In his lengthy response, Gaiman acknowledges that he mishandled personal relationships and said he was emotionally unavailable while being sexually available, self-focused, and not as thoughtful as I could or should be or should have been. However, when it comes to the more serious allegations made against him, Gaiman said adamantly these were not true, stating, quote, "Some of the horrible stories now being told simply never happened, while others have been so distorted from what actually took place that they bear no relationship to reality. I'm prepared to take responsibility for any missteps I made. I'm not willing to turn my back on the truth, and I can't accept being described as someone I'm not, and cannot and will not admit to doing things I didn't do." So he admits that he did some of the stuff, but even the stuff that he did do has been so distorted in the retelling that they bear no resemblance to what actually happened. Of course, there are two sides of the story. There's Neil Gaiman, his side of it, and there's the people recounting their side of the story. And obviously they're very, very wildly different as far as the nature of consent and the things that happen along there. And, when you read stuff like, "I was emotionally unavailable while being sexually available," I don't know Neil Gaiman, but when somebody tells me some gobbledygook bullshit like that, I find them very, very inauthentic. It feels like they're fucking lying, and their fucking lawyer read the statement and said, "Well, you should take some accountability and say you were emotionally unavailable. Maybe that's why they're not happy with you. It's because you didn't want to go in on a full relationship. It isn't all the sexual acts that you performed that may not have had consent that really got them upset. They just wanted to be your girlfriend, and you weren't available for that. And that's really, it's not your fault, Neil. Come on, dude. You're rich. You're famous. You did nothing wrong." And that's when I read gobbledygook bullshit like that, that screams of somebody taking zero accountability for their faults or their actions. In hindsight, now that the stories have come out. Now, one of the interesting things about it, there are a lot of really big similarities between a lot of the stories. One of the big similarities you get on almost all of them is that there was an NDA and a payout that was put out at the end of this once the relationship was concluded, basically saying, you can't say anything like this and I'll give you this much money. I think at one point, one lady was offered $5,000. That was the lady that was living, I think, in his New York extra house or whatever. And then her husband left her and she was there with her three girls. Some of the initial allegations for Tortoise Media. And then she said, no, this is like a $300,000 problem because of all the therapy I'm going to need for what you've done to me. And he agreed to it apparently immediately and paid that out in exchange for an NDA. Lots of NDAs involved in this story. When I don't know, NDAs are weird. Just on the face of it, it makes me think you probably did something wrong that you don't want anybody to talk about. But then again, I understand that there are, magazines out there and there are trades and stuff that really do put salacious details and embellish things to make people look bad, to sell things on, big headlines and things like that. And certainly Neil Gaiman is a celebrity and might want to, protect against that kind of stuff. But of course, once you get into, alleged illegal activity, the NDA stuff kind of goes out the window. And in the case of like the main person that's recounting their story in this article, her name is Pavlovich, and she got an NDA and a payout at the end of it. Another thing that's very, very prevalent throughout is him demanding to be called master, which, it seems kind of weird. It's, I don't know, like this is the weird thing. This is the weird thing. I'm a pretty meat and potatoes vanilla guy. I'm like, I understand kinks are out there, and we talk about these things more than we ever have, and acknowledge that there are different kinks. There's a different kink for everybody, and almost all of them are legal. As long as you have consent, you can do things that, in my very nature, seem a little bit like something that I don't know why people would want to do, but there are people that are into that stuff, and you would think that, with the way that we communicate with each other and the amount of people that might be into a BDSM and a relationship or some type of agreement where, yeah, I'll call you master and you can call me slave, and maybe you put me on a dog collar or something like that. There are people that will willingly do that, and it does appear in a lot of cases like he searched out people that kind of weren't, at least according to the allegations. And you do see the word no go on along the times as far as the things that are very similar throughout the stories. Like I said, lots of payouts and NDAs, lots of call me masters, and lots of people claiming that they said no, and he did not take no for an answer. And, as a father, I got 3 boys. There's one part of the story. The whole thing is just really nauseating when you read it. Like I said, I don't recommend a lot of people read it. That fucking article is not for everybody. It wasn't for me, but sometimes you got to dive into some things that you're not maybe even ready for. But at one point, this Pavlovich lady, who I guess is like some type of was hired to be like a babysitter, but became like a permanent like live-in like au pair nanny type of thing where she was working with him. And he started doing things like in front of his son, which I obviously probably freaked her out quite a bit. But at one point, she said his son like walked into the room and started calling her slave and saying that she had to call him master. It was like a little kid. And as a father, that stuff, like, that would hit me right in the balls. I'm like, oh God, you want to be a role model. And, sometimes you see kids do some of the things that you're not your most proud of, and you kind of laugh at it. You're like, oh man, I'm not really great with that one. But, for me, it's like saying like shit or something like that, which is embarrassing. When you have like a 7-year-old be like shit, you're like, oh, dang it, I wish I hadn't done that. And, it's funny because he's so little. But then you realize, in this case, you have a little kid telling a grown woman that he has to call her master and that she's a slave. And you're like, is that kid even going to have a chance? Like that's fucked up. Like that's a fucked up thing to do to a kid. It's a fucked up like frame of mind for a child to be in. But clearly, he had witnessed a lot of this kind of stuff and was comfortable with it. Now, is that story true? That's what the Pavlovich lady is saying. And maybe that's some part of the stories that Neil Gaiman's saying. Not only is that not the story, that's just not true whatsoever. None of that stuff happened. But she seemed pretty adamant about it. And she talks about talking to his now ex-wife, who was initially, I think, the person that hired him. Her name was Palmer. And it does not paint a pretty picture of her whatsoever. Almost like she's an accomplice, like was kind of setting people up for this stuff, knowing what Mr. Gaiman was into. At one point, there was one lady, not the main lady that's in the story, they're recounting another side story that I guess had engaged in like a sexual relationship with his wife at the time. And I guess when she had kind of gotten bored with her and didn't want to mess around with her anymore, she like introduced her to Neil. It was like, oh, you're going to love him. And she said afterwards, she felt like she had been like given it to him. Like, hey, I know what he's going to do to her. Like a little gift. Have fun with this one. She's already disturbed. You can break her some more type of thing. And, and this Pavlovich lady had brought up, went into the police, told her story, wanted to bring charges. And I think the police had even told her, well, a lot of this is going to hinge on, his ex-wife, this Palmer lady that you talked to, corroborating some of this information. And at one point, I think when she finally goes to her and explains to her the things that she's been through, which are way more horrendous than what I've described here. Like I said, I don't think you should read this because it's very, very disturbing stuff. The wife was like, yeah, this is like the 14th time this has happened. I'll be able to protect you. I've been through this before. And then she finally told her the story about his son. And apparently that one might have thrown her a little bit over the edge as a parent or whatever. And, she tried to call him and maybe he denied it. I'm not really sure. I think that's what happens in the story. But just really disturbing stuff. And, and it's the ultimate, don't meet your heroes type of thing. And that's one of the weird things about this kind of version of Earth that we're in now is everybody's so closely tied together. You can find out a lot of details about people's lives that normally you would be completely unaware of, that would be completely hidden. And a lot of times, those heroes that you might have or people that you look up to do end up falling, under the weight of scrutiny and criticism and kind of looking at the way that they've portrayed themselves, but the way that they're actually living their lives. And that's something I've certainly, I kind of knew it growing up, but, words are basically meaningless. It's all about your actions. You could say that you're the world's biggest racist. Like, man, that guy, self-proclaimed racist? He must be a bad guy. But then if you went out of your way and created a food kitchen that was specifically targeting and feeding people in a minority community, we're like, I don't know, is he a racist? He's helping people. He says he's a racist, but his actions don't meet up with that. Obviously, that's the exact opposite. The way most of these things happen, where you have Neil Gaiman, self-proclaimed feminist, outspoken during the Me Too movement. We need to honor women. We need to trust them, listen to them. And then you find out the way that he conducts himself, even if these things were all consensual, some of the things that he's doing and making sure that women are calling him master, it doesn't look like he really sees women as equals, or at least not in a sexual manner. And there's a lot of weird stuff kind of about Scientology in there as well. But, believe what people say as much as you want to. You can put all the credo and credence into that you want. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the way people handle themselves, the way that people treat people when there's nobody reporting on what they're saying, it's the way that people act when the cameras aren't around that really defines who you are. And, after reading this article and obviously reading the tortoise stuff and talking about it even, last year, I don't have any respect for Neil Gaiman as a man or as a human being. Even if most of it's exaggerated, no, there was consensual the whole time. It's quite clear that he has no respect for women. He's not a man of his word. He puts things out there, but he doesn't believe in them. He doesn't live by those type of credos. And he's a man that's all talk and no fucking substance in the end. And I don't respect that kind of stuff whatsoever. If you're going to walk the walk, you better fucking talk the talk. Well, if you're going to talk the talk, you better walk the fucking walk. I put that one backwards. And I think that's very, very important. And just as me as who I am, as a man and a husband and a father, all that stuff, I find that very, very important. I don't care what you have to say about something. What did you actually fucking do that really defines who you are? Your word is your fucking bond. And if you say that, we should believe all women and you should respect women and this is how you should treat them, and then it turns out that maybe you don't believe in any of those things once the door is closed, that means you're full of shit. you're full of shit, dude. And that is what Neil Gaiman is in my eyes. And I've never been the world's biggest Neil Gaiman fan. I will freely admit that. I understand why people might like the Sandman stuff. Little too fucking weird for me. I don't like sexuality like that. I don't like torture like that. None of that stuff is really in my wheelhouse. And while it's nothing that I would ever really talk about here on the channel, and I had plans to review the Mr. Miracle or Miracle Man series, I'm sorry, with Buckingham. Like I was going to do that on the Patreon for the Comics Guild. So I'm not going to do that. And this completely changes how I think about the man. And I already had my mind changed about him. Yes, he's a legendary writer and all that stuff. But it appears that he's just a bad man. And I don't want to have anything to do with a person like that. I don't respect him as a person. Sure, he's a good writer. Good on you. You made your bones there and you made a lot of money. And then you used it to lord it over people, put them in vulnerable positions, and make them call you fucking master. Then you had your kid having a grown woman try to call him master, calling her a slave. And that's like who you are as a man and as a person. And I find it just fucking heinous, the details that are in this fucking thing. And I'm sorry, I know I'm kind of all over the place. I try to streamline my thoughts here and stuff, but it is very, very difficult to really get a grasp on this stuff. And it's very, very disturbing. And I'm, I feel, my heart goes out to what I consider the victims. I believe them. There are enough similarities to all the stories that, one or two times maybe you made a mistake. Once we're getting up to like 8, 9 victims and all their stories are very, very fucking similar, we're beyond a pattern. And it appears that, he's a fucking predator. And it appears that his wife knew it and was setting other women up to be preyed upon by the guy. Whether those allegations pointed out to be true enough to get a conviction or any type of that, we'll see. If that does happen, it'll be interesting what DC does, because they certainly set a precedent that if you have certain level of like heinocity in your fucking conviction, they will just stop reprinting anything that you've ever done. So you could never make money anymore. The dude that worked with Mark Waid on Metal Men, or what was that, Magneto and the Metal Men? They don't reprint that guy's stuff because he was convicted of child pornography. And the allegations in here, while certainly different, are pretty much up there, in my opinion. I know some people are going to disagree with me, like, oh, you fucking sell out, Wes. These are just allegations. Yeah. You read enough information, you start parsing through the details, and you come up with a picture of who the man is. And I think he's a terrible person. And that's my own personal take. I definitely want to hear from you guys. A difficult subject to cover here, but certainly important, and a follow-up to some of the things I covered last month. But I don't know, it just got a lot worse. Just really heinous, disgusting things.